Hey Opties! Today we're talking about linear standard form. This is another formula that we can use to write the equation of a line. And I included that says linear standard form because there are standard forms for other type of function families. Let's take a look at our formula. AX plus BY equals C. So we notice that the variables are on the same side of the equation, which is something that's very different than the point slope form and the slope intercept form we've seen before. A would be a rate for X, and X is some quantity. B is the rate for Y, where Y is another quantity, and C is a constant. A constant just means it's a number. So let's take a look at an example. Tuckett is having a concert selling children tickets for $5 and adult tickets for $10. There were 215 children tickets and 523 adult tickets purchased. So we see that we've taken the $5 rate times the number of children tickets plus the $10 rate times the number of adult tickets, and the total of that is $6,305, which would be our C, or our constant. So that's how much money was received from the concert from selling those tickets. So that's an example of a context that you would see that this linear form would be useful for. So if we look at our slope, we see that we have an expression, negative A divided by B, and that's what tells us our slope. And here's an example of how we get to that slope. So we have our standard form, AX plus BY equals C, and if we subtract AX from both sides, then we get BY equals C minus AX. Now we'll take that equation and divide both sides by B to solve for Y. And then we have slope-intercept form. And we know that in slope-intercept form, M is the slope, and that's the coefficient of our X. So negative A over B is the coefficient of our X here. So that is our slope. So really what you need to remember if you're trying to find slope, if you don't want to remember the negative A over B, just remember if you solve it for Y, just look for the coefficient of X, which means that number multiplied by X that's in front of it. Standard form can be a useful form if you want to find X-intercept and the Y-intercept of your line pretty easily. That's because it's as simple as putting a 0 in for your Y to find the X-intercept and a 0 in for your X to find your Y-intercept. And once you do that for this form, it makes it pretty simple. So here, let's take a look. AX plus BY equals C. And if we put a 0 in for Y, that's a B times 0. So this term goes away because that's just a 0. And then we have AX equals C. And if we divide both sides by A, we get X is C over A. So the special way to find our X-intercept would be C over A. So we can write that as well. C over A, and that's always going to be a Y value of 0. For our Y-intercept, if we put a 0 in for our X, then that's going to end up being C over B. So if you want to remember it that way, that's okay too. Let's look at some practice. Number 1 says find a parallel and perpendicular slope to the following line. Okay, so we remember that if we solve our equation for Y, we will find the slope because it'll be the coefficient of X if we're in slope-intercept form. So let's do that. We'll subtract 2X from both sides. And negative 5Y, since that's a big old 0, is equal to 10 minus 2X. And we'll divide both sides by negative 5. That's a 1. So Y is going to be 10 divided by negative 5 is negative 2. And then the negative 2 divided by negative 5 would be a positive 2/5. And then that's our coefficient of X. So if we're going to do a parallel slope, since this is our slope of the line, and again, if you wanted to do the negative A over B, you could have done that. Negative A is negative 2, and divided by B is negative 5. So you would have had negative A over B is negative 2 over negative 5, which of course is going to be that positive 2/5 that we see there. Okay, so a parallel slope would be the same slope. So let's write it out. Parallel, that's going to be 2/5. And then perpendicular. Perpendicular slopes are opposite reciprocals. So let's start with 2/5. And let's make it opposite. So now it's negative 2/5. And then let's make it a reciprocal. So now it's negative 5/2. Okay, so that's our perpendicular slope. And we're done for number 1. Number 2, find the equation of a line in slope-intercept form that is parallel to the given line and passes through the given point. Okay, so let's use the negative a over b to find our slope. It might be a little quicker. Either way, it's fine. It's really the same thing. So negative a is going to be the positive 12, since we've taken the opposite sign of our negative 12, and divided by b. One thing that might be hard if you can't remember very well what's a and what's b, like a is in front of x, b is in front of y, those are the coefficients, then this may not be the best method for you. You might want to actually solve it for y, but whatever works for you. And that's going to be 3. So that's our slope we want to go parallel to. So our slope we're actually going to use is 3, because remember, parallel slopes are the same. And we're going through this point. So let's set up our point slope form, because we have a slope and a point. So that's the easiest one to use. So let's do y minus the y coordinate. So y minus negative 1 equals the slope of 3 times the quantity of x minus our x coordinate of our point, which is 2. Now we have y plus 1 equals 3x minus 6, because I just distributed here. And if we subtract 1 from both sides, y is 3x minus 7, and we're done, because that's our slope-intercept form. So step 1, find your slope. Step 2, figure out what slope you're going to use in your equation based on whether it's parallel or perpendicular. Step 3, put it into point slope form. Step 4, solve it for slope-intercept form. Number 3, find the equation of the line in slope-intercept form that is perpendicular to the given line and passes through the given point. Okay, so it's very similar to number 2, but we're just doing a perpendicular slope instead of a parallel slope. It's actually the same line and the same point. So we already knew that the slope was 3, so let's make it opposite reciprocal. Opposite would be negative 3, and that's really a negative 3 over 1. And to make it a reciprocal, it's going to be negative 1/3. Remember, reciprocal means to swap the location of numerator and denominator. Okay, so let's use our point and our slope in point slope form. Y minus the y coordinate, which is going to be subtracting a negative 1, which would be positive 1. Remember, in point slope form, the coordinates, the x and y coordinates, they will change sign when you substitute them in the point slope form, because the point slope formula is subtracting those numbers. Okay, so we've got 1/3 as our slope and times the quantity of x minus 2. Now let's distribute our 1/3. We have y plus 1 is 1/3 x minus 2/3, and we'll subtract 1 from both sides. Y is 1/3 x minus 2/3 minus 3/3. I just made that 1 to be a 3 over 3 so I can do that common denominator. And y is 1/3 x. Negative 2 minus 3 is a negative 5, so negative 5/3. So that is our equation, perpendicular to the given line through the given point in slope-intercept form. One more thing I want to mention. Sometimes you'll see an equation like, let's take this one here. That's negative 12x plus 4y equals 2. And let's say it has the y portions moved to the other side. Let's just say that's what happens. Or it could be like this, 4y equals 2 plus 12x. So the x piece has been moved to the other side. And it asks you for the slope. Okay, so there is no negative a over b, because that's only for standard form, and this is not in standard form, right? Your variable pieces are on the opposite sides of the equation. It can't be standard form. But remember, how do we get to negative a over b? We just solved the equation for y and looked for the coefficient of x, because that's what happens with slope-intercept form. So you can still do that here. You could subtract 2 from both sides and divide by -4, and then you'd still have a +3 for your slope on this one. And then really these are all the same equation rewritten, so it's still gonna have a slope of 3 here. But what you would do is just divide by this 4. It's really kind of done one step for you. So if you see something kind of funky like this, remember that you could just solve for y. All right, Opties, that's it for standard form. See you next time.